edition of the Championship Talk podcast. I'm your host Paul O'Toole, and joined opposite me is my co-host Thomas Falco.
Hello.
So we're going to be covering the news that's happened over the two rounds of fixtures that we've covered. I think the one place to start is the allowance of fans into stadiums. Now, we briefly touched on this in our last podcast, that this was going to happen. Now we have a clear understanding of where each club sits in those various tiers, and I'm just going to run down which club will be allowed fans. We believe they'll be allowed fans from Wednesday. However, that will be dependent on clubs being able to put processes in place to allow fans in safely. So the likelihood is potentially Saturday. So I'm going to run down the clubs, every club in the Championship and where they sit. So we're going to start with AFC Bournemouth. The website I'm using decides to go in that alphabetical order. They're in Tier 2. They will be allowed up to 2,000 fans from the forthcoming home fixture from Huddersfield, which will be on the 12th. So obviously they're going to be a little bit late. They're actually going to be a couple of weeks. Barnsley are in Tier 3. Birmingham are in Tier 3. Blackburn are in Tier 3. So those three clubs will not be allowed fans in the stadium as it stands at the moment. Brentford are in Tier 2. And the first time they will have fans in their new stadium, I think this is quite important, will be at home to Blackburn on the 5th of December. So the first time Brentford will actually have fans in their new stadium, and they're allowed up to 2,000 fans. Bristol City are in Tier 3. Cardiff spectators are not permitted because they're a Welsh team, and obviously Welsh, the kind of Wales and Scotland have got their own different versions of this lockdown, so Welsh teams will not be allowed fans in the stadium. Coventry are in Tier 3, not that it matters, they don't even play their own ground. Derby are in Tier 3, Huddersfield are in Tier 3, Luton are in Tier 2, so they will be allowed fans in from the home fixture to Norwich on the 2nd of December. Middlesbrough are in Tier 3, Millwall are in Tier 2, so they will be allowed fans from their fixture with Derby on the 5th. Norwich are in Tier 2, which for those of you who live in this part of the world, we kind of guessed they would be. They will be allowed fans in from their fixtures from Sheffield Wednesday onwards. That's the 5th of December. Nottingham Forest are in Tier 3. Preston are in Tier 3. QPR are in Tier 2. Their first home game that allowed fixtures is the 12th of December. Reading are in Tier 2. Their first fixture at home to Forest on the 5th of December will be allowed fans. Rotherham are in Tier 3. Sheffield Wednesday are in Tier 3. Stoke are in Tier 3. Swansea obviously are in the same position that Cardiff are in. Watford are in Tier 2. And their fixtures at home to Cardiff on the 5th of December will be when they start having fans in their stadium. They've actually got 3 home games on the bounce. So Cardiff on the 5th, Rotherham on the 8th, Brentford on the 15th. They will all have fans in. Wycombe Wanderers are also in Tier 2. And I'm just going to say, Adams Park is going to look sort of 25% full with 2,000 fans in. Their first fixture is at home to Stoke on the 2nd of December. So that is actually the midweek fixture. And that will have fans in as well. Amazing, I think is the best way to describe it. I'm looking forward to seeing football with fans in, as long as it's safe to do so. To be honest, at this time of the year, you probably got more chance of catching hypothermia than COVID. And obviously, we said before, these stadiums are huge, so social distancing shouldn't be a problem. Depending on how it's laid out. I can't wait to see the fixtures with fans in again.
No, I mean, it's going to be different because there are other rules in place where fans are not allowed to sing or chant, for example, and very...
We're used to that. We've been to Norwich a few times.
No further comment.
Sorry. But, hey, look, we've been to a lot of Norwich games.
But no, that's interesting to see how they're going to dish out how the fans are going to be able to get into the stadiums. I know some of the clubs I've been reading up about, at this level anyway, I've been talking about balloting systems, maybe like that as well, because I took a bit of time reading about the teams in League 2, for example, and they're saying that they'll make sure that all of their season ticket holders will be able to access the games, and that's of course, because the lower down you go, there'll be less sort of season ticket holders involved, but some of these clubs in the Championship will have a hefty list of season ticket holders, so narrow it down to 2,000.
I mean, we know ourselves.
We're looking at balloting systems as well. I was thinking
we know how hard it is to get hold of tickets to Norwich at the moment. And that was last year. That it's nearly impossible to get a ticket for Norwich. You kind of limit that fan base that is a really, really well supported fan base. They sell out. They almost sell their season tickets out. And I know that in last couple of years, there's actually been waiting lists for season tickets. You're saying over 2,000 of those are allowed in. It's a lottery, basically.
Yeah, and there's got to be some sort of fair balloting system in place there to obviously able to facilitate fans to get a fair chance to get to go and watch their team. It's been so long. I just think that'd be a nice little fill up at this time of year as well, especially as long as it's safe. I was looking as well into the possibility. I would imagine that away fans are not going to be going to these games, which is going to be slightly odd as far as the atmosphere go, because obviously fans from Tier 3 won't be able to go to, well, they ain't even have to go to their own grounds to watch teams play, so I would very much doubt that there would be the possibility of them going to teams who are in Tier 2 to watch their team. So there's a lot to work out still, as you've said, the possibility, but the lockdown ends on the 2nd of December, so the possibility of fans being in stadiums could come after the end of the lockdown, but you're looking more likely at Saturday and the weekend fixtures for fans to return. And as you've said, it's going to be good. It's going to be different. It's going to be unique. We had a couple of test games, didn't we, where was it 500 fans or 1,000 fans? I can't remember the numbers now. Dependent. Yes, and there were a couple of teams in the Championship who had test games as well, wasn't there? And further down the football pyramid as well. So it's going to be interesting. Watch this space, and as long as people can keep safe and adhere to the social distance and washing your hands, keeping space, it's going to be interesting to see. And hopefully, as time goes on with the rollout of the vaccine, you'll be seeing more fans being allowed to go in, and then we're a long way off getting capacity, but it's a start, isn't it? It is a start.
Well, the two games that are slated to be the Wednesday games, which is Wycombe hosting Stoke and where was that? I just had it up. Luton hosting Norwich. They're both games that are due to have fans in, provided the clubs can meet safety precautions. We potentially could see fans in stadiums as early as Wednesday. When you look at the 9 clubs that are allowed fans, obviously the London clubs have a massive advantage here because there's more than 1 or 2 London clubs in this league, and obviously London being in Tier 2 as well. As you said about some of the smaller clubs that perhaps financially are struggling, it really does penalise certainly Cardiff and Swansea, where they're not even in a tier system. They're not even playing by the same rules as everyone else.
Yeah, but the thing you've got to look at here as well is if there are fans in the stadium, you're looking at the premiums that clubs would have to pay for, I don't know, even if they're just home fans, I'd imagine there's got to be some sort of policing or stewarding involved as well.
Of course,
you'd imagine that the charges from that come into effect. I don't think there are a lot of football clubs who are looking forward to this as a financial financial saviour, for example, because they're not going to be making a lot of money, and there are some clubs who, like most of the fans who go in, will be season ticket holders, and depending on the club, they've already got that income and are refunding people on a rolling basis, so it's money in some cases that is already within the clubs as well. But I think we're looking further down the football pyramid where you can maybe get tickets on the tickets on the gate, but you know what I mean, people who maybe won't be able to fill their stadiums with season ticket holders and getting money like that. It's just good to get back to normal. I think that's a very good thing mentally as well as physically, that these supporters are able to go and sort of support their clubs again and get back to being able to release a bit of vitriol that you have over the working week. And obviously now with COVID, there's a lot of frustrations there. Obviously they can't release it by chanting and singing and hurling abuse at referees, so it's going to be very different and very unique, which has summed up the last nearly year, isn't it, really, when it comes to football? Very, very different and very, very unique.
Norwich had a test game, and you looked at the noise that even a small amount of fans in the stadium makes, and just has an atmosphere. It is really, really good. As you say, I hadn't quite thought of the cost implication, which probably is going to make this, if they're lucky to break even, if the money they do earn cancels out the cost, which for most clubs probably won't, as you said, with season ticket holders. You kind of think, as we move into having more and more fans in, obviously 9 of these teams will already have a working model, so they would potentially have fans in quicker. But it's really, really good. We're going to move on to something that isn't really, really good, and that's Darnell Fisher's. It's been deemed violent conduct, hasn't it?
It has been deemed violent conduct. We won't pull any punches here. It was a flat-out genital grab, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. No, you're right. It was.
But that was how it's been
bordering on
reported in the
sexual
press.
assault, yeah.
It is how it's been reported in the press. Yes, the FA have deemed it as violent conduct for grabbing the genitals of Sheffield Wednesday's Callum Patterson. Fisher initially denied the charge, which...
How can you... Oh my god, anyway, whatever,
yeah, but obviously a 3-game ban. When you look at other sports, as we said, there was the incident in the rugby union where a player got a 10-game suspension, so maybe 3 games is a little bit lenient. And some of the newspapers and websites made light of the fact that when Blackburn played Preston, Lewis Holtby guarded his crotch whenever the player in question was close by. So
really?
there was light made of that, but it is a very serious thing, as we've talked about last season and talked about in the last podcast. Sorry, it is a very serious thing because it is, whatever way you look at it, it is assault, isn't it? Really, it's a very sensitive subject for people, and I don't think I'd be too pleased if that would happen to me on a football pitch and the person just gets a 3-game ban, because that's not much of a deterrent, is it? Really, 3 games for something so sort of sensitive and personal, it just doesn't sit right with me. But that's as less as it is.
We're going to move on to another tragic subject, and this is something that you wanted to talk a lot about, or you wanted to talk about, and that's the sad passing of Diego Maradona.
Yeah, obviously we are the Championship Talk podcast, so moving on to a world icon seems a bit odd for us, but obviously he is one of the global superstars. When you think of famous footballers, he'd be in the top 3 or 4 of anyone's list, even people who don't know a lot about football. His name transcends football, doesn't it? And for whatever reasons as well, having discussions with friends and people at work about Maradona, yes, you could look at the hand of God and the multiple incidents where he has been suspended for drug abuse and other incidences as well. His friendships in Italy that he formed as well. You can read many books about that as well. But it's still sad. I mean, 60, when you look at the way he lived his life, 60 is probably not a bad age to live to. He had a lot of medical conditions and ailments, didn't he? He died of a heart attack in the end. He'd been in hospital for an operation to remove a subdural hematoma at the start of the month. There was reports from reputable sources that over lockdown he'd found it very hard and had become alcohol dependent again, which is obviously very sad, because for someone who was so talented, he had a lot of flaws, and I think that's what drew people to him. He was a flawed genius, and whatever way you tend to look at Maradona, he was a fantastic footballer who brought joy to the entire country of Argentina, as you've seen from the images in the news from the passing of his death. Maybe the riots after the funeral service and things like that weren't so great, but, well, they were great, full stop. But the fact they had days of mourning nationally to mark his passing. I mean, if you look into his career as well, I learned quite a bit about his career as well. He started off with Argentinos Juniors in 1976 before going to Boca Juniors. While he, in the earlier stage of his career, I don't know if you've read that Sheffield United had a chance to sign him. Have you ever heard that, Paul? I think that was the late 70s.
No.
Yeah, Sheffield United and the higher up at the time said at Sheffield United, but they didn't want to spend money on an unproven Argentinian. And that's been verified in the press by the manager at the time's son as well. Very much worth seeking that out. We haven't got enough time to tell that story in the podcast, but very much worth seeking that out. He moved to Barcelona for what was then a world record fee of £5 million. He won the Copa del Rey in 1982-83 and the Copa de la Liga and Supercopa de España in 1983, following a very violent fight in the Copa del Rey final in 1984. Again, I don't know if you've seen the video clips of that. He actually knocked someone flat out, didn't he, in the pitch, and there was a massive set to on the pitch as well. Very violent scenes. He left Barcelona in disgrace, really, and went to Napoli for another world record fee of £6.9 million. He led Gliazzeri to their first Serie A title in 1986-87, as well as the Coppa Italia in the same season, the UEFA Cup in 88-89, and the Supercoppa Italiana in 1990. Again, controversy reared its ugly head. 15-month suspension for testing positive for cocaine as well. Left there under, again, in a bit of disgrace. Went to Sevilla for a season before going back to Argentina with Newell's Old Boys and finally Boca Juniors. I think for people like us who maybe don't know his domestic career, you can't look past his international career, can you? Represent Argentina helped Argentina win the 1986 World Cup with the old hand of God, and then a couple of moments later, that fantastic solo goal where he seemed to have looked like he rounded all of the England team 6 times over before finishing. I don't think you can argue that he lifted his country to World Cup glory, and then the following World Cup campaign in 1990 lifted his country in a place where he was playing his home football for Napoli at the time, took Argentina to the final. I think he inspired his team to get to the final. They lost a very underwhelming final 1-0 to West Germany. Then, of course, 1994, probably the first World Cup we can remember, Paul, being the age we are, 35-34.
Solid Ireland.
Scored that goal again. Yes, they were the only team from this part of the world to qualify, weren't they? None of the other home nations qualified. And well, you can't really call Republic of Ireland a home nation. They're part of Great Britain. Anyway, that's a debate for another day. He scored that goal, didn't he, and then went to the camera and wide-eyed, I'm doing it now, I know you can't see me, wide-eyed, swearing at the camera, or shouting at the camera, failed a drugs test not long after, that was his international career over. He had an underwhelming managerial career. I think the highlight of that was actually managing Argentina in the World Cup in 2010. I want to say, does that work out right? That was 2010, wasn't it? In South Africa, that would have been. Yes, he was manager there. He won 18 of his 24 games in charge of Argentina and lost the other 6. At the time of his passing, he was actually a manager. He was the manager of Gimnasia de la Plata in the Argentine Primera Division. Again, we've already said it. Player clouded in controversy, but there's no doubt whatsoever that he is one of the greatest ever to play this sport of ours, and our thoughts with the friends and family of Diego Armando Maradona, who sadly passed away at the age of 60 last week.
No, and I think it's worth saying at the time that Napoli were effectively Serie A's Burnley, and it was like Maradona going to Burnley and lifting them to winning the Premier League. That's kind of a similar analogy. Anyway, you want to talk about, switching gears a little bit, the Championship clubs that have been joining the FA Cup?
Yes, of course. The magic of the FA Cup. I said to you off air that I want to cover this because this is traditionally when I start writing in my Christmas cards and wrapping up presents. So this is when it becomes real that Christmas is on the horizon. Third round draw of the FA Cup was held a little while ago. Hope was high because Robbie Savage was drawing both teams, which still is rather odd, seeing there's one person drawing both teams. And the sound failed on the BBC coverage just before the draw. You were thinking, yes, I don't have to hear his voice, and then it come back just in time for the draw. I was like, oh. But never mind. Anyway, we're going to cover these games. The ties are to be played between the 8th and 11th of January 2021. So obviously there's a lot of coverage from BBC and BT Sport when it comes to the FA Cup, so you'll be able to follow your team in one way or another through either of those services. Huddersfield Town host Plymouth Argyle. Chorley host Derby County. That's an appealing tie. Oldham against Bournemouth. Manchester United against Watford. Another tasty one there. Stevenage against Swansea. Everton against Rotherham. Nottingham Forest against Cardiff. Barnsley against Tranmere. Canvey Island or Boreham Wood, who are playing as we're on air, face Millwall. Blackburn against Doncaster Rovers, Stoke City against Leicester City, Wickham against Preston in one of the all-championship ties, Bristol City against Portsmouth, Queen's Park Rangers against Fulham, Brentford against Middlesbrough, Manchester City against Birmingham, Luton against Reading, Exeter against Sheffield Wednesday, and Norwich City face Coventry City in a repeat of the game that was played at the weekend.
Good set of results. I always like it when we don't get too many all-championship ties because it means that.
No, and the game that sticks
again.
Well, transcending the championship, game of the third round for me is Marine, who I believe are one of the lowest ranked teams to ever make round 3, are hosting the leaders of the Premier League, Tottenham Hotspur. Phenomenal, and they had the
Mourinho's going to go part the bus at Marine.
But they had the manager as part of the third round coverage of the draw, and he was saying this run to the cup, because they can't have fans in, and again we look further down the pyramid, they won't have a great amount of fans in their stadiums, but a run to the third round of the FA Cup is making that club financially secure for seasons to come. So it is what the third round of the FA Cup is all about, and they're not the only lower represented team who have reached this stage of the third round of the FA Cup, but they are one of the lowest ranked teams ever to get to round 3. It's a phenomenal achievement and massive kudos to Marine, and hopefully they don't disgrace themselves against Tottenham. You fear for a massive whitewash, but as a neutral, I know you realistically are not going to see Marine win, but you want them to hold Tottenham close, don't you?
Get a draw.
Well, that'd be absolutely fantastic to go back to Tottenham's new ground and get more money there, because I would imagine that the initial game will be live on TV, so that's even more money in the coffers for them. So yeah, just the magic of the FA Cup third round. We'll talk about that when the time comes round again in the new year.
Perfect. Thanks for that roundup. So that concludes the roundup of the news. Thank you all for watching. hit us a thumbs up if you like the show. Leave us a comment down below if you think there's anything we've missed. Also, watch out for our mini-series, A History Of. So so far we've looked at Barnsley. We're also upcoming will be Birmingham and Blackburn. Really, really fun recording those. Those are going to be up in a couple of weeks. Again, if there's anything you want us to cover, leave us a comment on the video down below. You always can check out our full podcast where we review all the games, and that's on any major podcast streaming service. So we shall speak to you all next week. That's goodbye from me.
That's goodbye from me.
Bye everyone. Speak to you all next week.
Bye.